All right, so here we are going live today. It's a little later than usual. Thought I'd sit here and allow everyone to move into questions, etc. Um, Wanted to talk about some upcoming projects, working into some of the things that we have planned, and give everybody an update if that is of interest as well. Um, and yeah, that's the live. We also can play with some Koan cards today. If you'd like a Koan card, you can go ahead and ask, and we'll pull one of those for you. We can even start with the Koan card today. We'll start with this one. This one's good. This one's a good one to start the day. This one is also good in the midst of some sort of apparent struggle. Just as a reminder, this is the new official back. I don't know if it shows that effect like it shows on the camera, but it does have kind of a cool effect while being rotated. First card is What Wow is Here. What wow is here. It's that's just a pointing toward curiosity. And what that does is it kind of helps us penetrate the veil of certainty or conclusion that we may be under in the moment. Starting to explore the newness in the moment, starting to explore the newness and experience. It's just noticing what's wow. This is actually also a really good pointing for those of you who experience boredom or this sense of restlessness. This is actually really commonly reported for everyone, actually, for a lot of people on the path. When they are working with inquiry or maybe even resting in stillness, this sense of boredom can be kind of really pervasive. And it really only seems to show up as a buffer with a sense of restlessness or discomfort. But if you don't recognize that seems to be what's underlying the experience of boredom, then you can simply ask what wow is here. And you might start to notice things along the edges, we could say. You might start to notice more of the periphery, and you might start to notice some newness in the mundane. And there is something in that because the mind is geared for satisfaction. That's just what it's looking for, a predictable nature of some sort of completion, a sense of being right, a sense of knowing something even before an event. And that satisfaction, the vacuum of that satisfaction, we could call boredom or a sense of restlessness, dissatisfaction. What we really want to do is essentially wean ourselves off of that cycle of satisfaction. We could say that that is a dopamine pursuit. And initially along the path, some of you may have viscerally experienced withdrawal, dopamine withdrawal. It does happen. And that is when you start to notice things maybe a little bit more acutely, and they start to feel maybe more uncomfortable. It's okay, it doesn't last long. What we're essentially doing is we're penetrating the veil of satisfaction here, and we're stepping more into the unknown. So that simple pointing, what wow is here, gives you a sense. It opens up the aperture, and you begin to see, experience, feel, otherwise sense something spontaneous and immediate. And that's the right there. That's the energy of curiosity. And I know it's been mentioned before, yet just to kind of clarify for those of you who may not have heard this pointing, it seems as if curiosity itself is the dynamic essence, the energy, the motion of innocence. It's the essence of resting in the question and not pursuing the answer and not expecting some sort of platform of experience. And if you really rest with that even now, to know something is essentially to step away from the engagement. It's interesting. But if we rest in knowledge, we're resting in the model of our experience instead of the immersion of our experience. So this is why the pointing says, rest with the question, because the question is the answer. This isn't about a pursuit of an answer. And I know intellectually that can be challenging because we're usually looking for a sense of satisfaction for every question. This is what you might experience in self inquiry when asking, "Who am I?" Maybe an answer arises in thought. Maybe it does that a lot. This is why we continue the self inquiry until we can just rest in the "Who am I?" without having an answer to rest. And this is where we start to basically see how the edges begin to bleed. The metaphor that can be used is the rainbow. We can never touch or the rainbow. We can never capture it. But in the pursuit of the rainbow, it starts to become skewed, and then maybe we even lose sight of it. But in this experience, in this temporal arising, isn't the rainbow perfect as it is? Does it need to be grasped? Does it need to be touched? Does it need to be contained? Does it need to be held and owned? And you'll start to see that it's just a grasping itself, that there's almost a sense of requirement that arises with identity, is that something must be grasped, it must be owned, it must be hoarded, it must be collected, it must be put away. Here in the immediate, we are essentially allowing that which is spontaneous. We could call that luminosity, illuminance, something that is arising suddenly, presently, without the grasping, without the context, something like that. Anyway, it's been an interesting week. I know there has been a lot of questions around potential controversies and things like that. I'm definitely open to answering any questions around that as well. There's really not controversy. It's just the nature of how these things go, and how pieces of identity can still keep coming to the surface. This is the whole point, is that we're really never done. We're always open to engage. And one of the things that Angelo mentions often is one of his precepts of awakening is you have to want this more than anything else. And I think it's a really great pointing. I think some people might co-opt that and feel like it's a justification for seeking. Well, if I want this, then I have to work harder. It's not necessarily that way. So to expand that a little bit, what I will invite in this particular moment is that it's the willingness, the absolute willingness to be surprised, to be shocked, to have the mind blown, so to speak. And what we begin to find is within that opening, there is so much right here, right now, that is absolutely revealing itself as completely mind blowing, completely opening, completely vulnerable, spontaneous, and immediate, sudden, these things. To play with that willingness, there must be a sense of curiosity, and also there must be a sense of courage. These things are already built in. They don't need to be measured. You don't need to worry about how much courage or curiosity you do have. You have all that's needed, that's for sure. Now it's a matter of application. It's moving from the model and the suggestion of thought into the immersion of experience. And you've probably had these experiences throughout your entire existence. The flow state that happens when we're completely immersed in an activity, we could say. A good example is recently, I think it was yesterday, or maybe 2 days ago, somebody was talking about stacking wood. And they were saying they were so immersed in stacking wood, there was no reflecting on the stacking of the wood. There was no one knowing about stacking the wood. This, in essence, is part of chop wood, carry water. It's exactly that. It's immersion, engagement. But I think what we tend to do as human beings is we have found such a refuge, an experience that feels like safety in thought, probably starts in childhood, a place of fantasy, a place of disassociation that temporarily it may give us relief from an experience that feels overbearing and intense and excruciating, maybe. And I think we become fixated on that. And as time goes, we basically depend on the survival mechanism as a way to sustain a sense of stability. And right in there, you might find the rub of this, that if we continue using a tool that is only really there for survival, that it eventually backs us into a corner and our suffering becomes much more acute. And it's not really like we live in a debt, but it can appear, at least in a lot of people's experiences, that our suffering is on delay. In other words, we keep running from it and it becomes more insistent. And the suffering, all it really is it's not the experience, it's not even the sensations, it's not that. That's the object of experience. The suffering is the resistance to what is arising, what is revealing itself. That's it. And that can be challenging because really it's hard to objectify it enough to get the mind to stay interested enough in the relationship itself, the resistance, the sense of attention. But I think as you start to play a little bit more with sensations and senses, and you begin to immerse yourself outside of the modeling of thought, you will begin to find something more immaculate and immediate, something that speaks for itself, a type of intelligence that doesn't match the framework of the binary aspects of thought. It's like when thought suggests Koan cards. In the picking up of this box, the direct experience of this box, the sound, the sensation, even the smell, smells like a new book, you could say. That experience cannot be contained in the thought. It cannot be contained in the thought at all. In fact, we cannot remember what we feel unless we're feeling it now. It is this way. That gives us a sense of the shadow of experience. It's a second density. Thought only works in a two-dimensional manner. This is the nature of our sense of duality. It's this or that, these opposites, these extremes, a spectrum that takes place. And even if you rest in that experience here and now, you might start to see an image. A lot of people will see an image of time. Time, for most people, seems to flow from the left to the right. There's a cultural conditioning in that. Different cultures have different experiences of time based on their conditioning. But that left to right experience, there's a spectrum of past, moving here to present, moving to future. That is just thought. That's just a very low level essence of thought there. And it only shows up in a spectrum because it cannot experience the third dimension of experience. Thought is but a shadow, a model of an experience. If it says Koan cards, that is just a representation of this experience, which can only be experienced in this very moment. This cannot be contained in thought. So that's the aspect of verification that has been brought up in some recent videos. The pebble in the hand right there. And you probably wouldn't be surprised, maybe you would. How often in session I'm asking someone about pebble in the hand, to imagine that pebble right in the center of the palm, to imagine it having some texture and some color variation. And then once it's asked, is that a pebble? The majority of people say yes, because this is our relationship with thought. It's revealing. It's not intended to be a trick. It's intended to reveal our relationship with these thoughts. That thought says it's real, it must be real. And so we say, yes, it's real. This encouragement here is to move beyond the model into the experience itself. It's essentially saying, step out of the classroom, step off the mat, get off the cushion, and begin to apply these experiences with just simply attention, just the motion of attention into your actual life. This is part of that pointing that life is the best pointer. That's the encouragement. That's the pointing here. And so when we move beyond that two dimension of thought, what we begin to discover, and maybe you've already noticed this, it'd be nice to hear from you if you have. Thoughts can't feel. Thoughts have a model of feeling. Thoughts have a model of sensation, but they themselves can't feel. We cannot think ourselves into a feeling that we're not currently feeling. The context of that feeling is definitely thought oriented. Even the sense of preference in that feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, these things, that seems to be in the realm of thought. That's part of that lamination of experience. From what I've heard about Adyashanti, he calls that the Velcro. It's much like that. It comes up this way as a lamination. It feels like it's attaching itself to the sensation. It's essentially attempting to orient itself to something that is formless and inherently unknown. If you become still enough, you might begin to realize that no sensation has any form of meaning or any specific quality, at least long term. It can be very, very quickly fleeting. It's like these flashes of appearances, like these bits of clay that mold themselves and then return to clay. This sense of emptiness that suddenly arises as maybe a flicker of glitter falling to the ground, and we just catch it momentarily and then seemingly gone. That's how sensations seem to be. They are so utterly formless that we have a pattern of attempting to orient to them. The mind is guessing around our experiences, and there are layers of these guesses. Sometimes that layer shows up as narrative, shows up as memory in the past, but it also shows up as the label itself. But this isn't just about the semantics of the experience. It's just noticing that the label comes with an assumed quality of narrative, an assumed quality of history, an assumed relationship to something that we just aren't actually engaging with. We are assuming and then moving away from, or assuming and then attempting to solve it as a problem. The encouragement here is now verification in the sensational space as well. And this is not about bypassing. So if what arises is a sense of frustration, let's say, to move into that as truth. Anything that's presenting itself, just regard it as truth, no matter if it seems to be thought or not. This isn't about debating thought. Thought wants us to do that. This isn't about resisting the thought. Thought wants us to do that. It'll play both sides of the coin of its non-dual construct. It'll want you to fight thought. It loves that because that is still, it's doing its duty, keeping us in a sense of orientation and certainty about something, keeping us in a state of distraction away from that which is unknown. But I think ultimately, you'll probably find these sensations are inherently formless and unknown. But it takes a little bit of moving through the context. And I know that part is challenging. And really, there's a lot of empathy with you along the way. This is the reason these sessions can be so valuable for those of you who do sessions, because I will die with you. I will feel it with you. I will move all the way. We will walk this together. As someone who has done this multiple times and had this experience of dying into something infinitely over and over, it becomes easier as we go. In other words, it becomes kind of natural or effortless. It's always that first time that we die that's the hardest. And I don't mean physically, of course. Although to the mind, it's indecipherable. And so to penetrate into or through that context, we can play the game of recontextualization, which can help. But eventually, what we'll come to, it seems anyway, is that we get to a very subconscious level of I like it, I don't like it. This sense of yes and no, those pieces there. When we start to reach that particular threshold, we could say, that's when things become a lot more profound, because the no can show up in some physiological reactions as well. And this is where I also recommend not too hard of a push, but a consistent engagement, a consistent immersion. When you have practiced the broads of this experience, the regularity of feeling, and you have essentially in a practical way sharpened your EQ enough where you are just ready to engage and attention is naturally moving or naturally there, naturally responding to what we feel, you will probably notice more of a sense of equanimity. Thoughts become less desperate until we get to something that feels like a primary sense of no. What's interesting is that when something is effortless and automatically accepted, we tend not to make note in the mind. We tend not to remember it. And this is kind of like the experience of taking something for granted as a human being. It's because the effortless aspects of our lives we aren't noticing and we're not immersing in. And what begins to happen is we only start to emphasize the things that are the no's. That's what the mind really remembers the most: the challenges, the difficulties, the obstacles, the sense of no. That's the mind telling on itself. If there's a sense of no there, it's also telling us to move away, to resist, to hesitate, to fix it, these things. But the encouragement here is get to know that sense of no to see if it's truly a no. In other words, can you verify that there's something in it that is undesirable, or is that just a layer of interpretation after the fact? A sense of interpretation on top of it. And once you start to encounter that no, this is where you begin the narrows of experiences. The broads is the regularity of engagement, feeling all the time, taking it off the mat, putting it into practice, immersing in experience. And when that reflective mind stops attempting to make heads or tails of the experience and it stops attempting to orient, suddenly these sensations can begin to take a very paradoxical tone. They become unknowable, unknown. There's something there. This is why we call it a sense gate, because immediately we start to have a dam break open and paradox becomes recognized pretty much everywhere. It shows up in the visual field, it shows up in sound, it shows up in flavor profiles and scents. Paradox is everywhere, but one place that paradox cannot be understood, unfortunately, is in the mind. And that's just because of the nature of the mind isn't suited for that. It's suited for reference points. It's suited for creating a pattern. It's suited for creating a sense of separation, because that's the only way anything can be known, is if there's an imposed sense of separation. The identity says, I know who I am because I know who I am not. I know what I am because I know what I am not. If it didn't have those places of comparing and contrasting, it couldn't know what it was. That's how the mind functions. And it's not a problem. It's not actually an opponent. It's just a tool that is suitable for what it's good for and absolutely not suitable for what it's not designed for. It's an apparatus, an interface for this apparent external reality. But once that thought mechanism begins to turn into a sense of self or a sense of sensation, this internal world, we could say, or what appears to be an internal world, at least initially, we begin to see where the dissonances arise, because it has to create a sense of separation to know anything. And if it says it knows about us, then you're seeing where that primary rift is. And it tends to seemingly orbit around this first wound experience, what we can call a first wound, a primary sense of shame, a sense of lacking, a statement of I'm not good enough, I'm broken, something's wrong with me, I'm not smart enough, I can't do this alone, I'm dangerous for the world, it's never going to happen, whatever these pieces are. Something about me missing something. And then what it does is it creates a dangling carrot scenario, something we can never capture. It creates a rainbow, but it tells us we must grab a hold of the rainbow to be whole, instead of just remaining still and realizing wholeness is here. So within that paradox, the dam begins to break open and we start to recognize something quite intimate. To realize we are what we feel is basically the same thing as to realize we are experience itself. And if we are experience itself, the pointing of I am that becomes pretty unique, pretty powerful, because there's no I in that anymore. It begins to kind of merge. And in that experience, a fundamental sense of well-being becomes absolutely obvious. The number one thing I hear in the midst of awakenings, and I've seen quite a few at this point, at least Kensho, and it's, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Of course not, because the mind it cannot orient to that which is already in a state of perfection and not divided, not arbitrarily compartmentalized. When we realize we aren't contained, that we're not isolated, when we're not apart, then we can start examining essentially these mechanisms that may remain. I mean, after Kensho, these particular mechanisms seem to still remain, these compensation mechanisms, these protection mechanisms. But for some reason, we are now almost seeing everything from the inside out, so to speak. We're at the very moment of experience instead of only in the moment of reflection, only in the hall of mirrors. And from there, we begin to see all these particular mechanisms play themselves out almost like a ghost. It's interesting. It can be a reaction wanting to come up. We can feel an upwelling sense of maybe an effort or a survival or a fight back. And we almost watch it play itself out without participating in it. Internally, it's like a ghost reaching out, that hungry ghost, attempting to grab a hold of something. But when we're not participating in it, we see that even that was inherently a delusion, inherently not real. It's interesting. We can have that experience very close to home, very intimately, and anyone else watching us would see nothing. It would seem like someone just being still. And that's how close we can get to the essence of reaction. And as those things begin to play themselves out, they lose momentum. They lose inertia, and then they just come to rest. They reach what the Buddhists would call cessation. They just cease. It is just like every thought. They are these droplets of a sense of experience that moves right back into the pond. And once that droplet hits the water, it's indecipherable from all that is. It's indecipherable from the rest of the water. So most of these pointings are to give you a sense of the fluidity of this reality. And utilizing our very intimate experience of sensation is just a perpetual gift. It's something for us to turn the flashlight of attention toward that isn't thought. But it's not just sensation alone, of course. It's just the most ubiquitous experience that we have as human beings. Might as well know it well. And then there may be spontaneous arisings of other portals, so to speak, other infinite ways to engage with this seemingly endless inertia of the unknown. It does seem really clear that the only place we really can experience joy is in the experience of the unknown. Everything else that we are pursuing, all of these desires and wants, the sense of predictive future, it's all about satisfaction. And that is not the same experience. Satisfaction is temporary, it is fleeting, it is the Christmas present that you stop playing with once February hits. It's like that. We don't want satisfaction. If you rest in stillness enough, you will start to see that there's such a painful quality of satisfaction as well. And that really all of our existential kink arises out of this need to be satisfied. And one of our primary needs to be satisfied is knowing something. I mean, that's pretty primary. Knowing an answer, having a sense of dominion over experience itself. It plays right into our sense of agency as well. Knowledge and agency are actually the same mechanism at play to control, manipulate, modify experience existence to the point of having some sense of dominion. It is ego alone. And if we looked at ego in the most extreme, it's Pac-Man. It would consume everything and still feel empty and still continuously consume until there was only one, which is kind of ironic. It seems like all things head the same direction to a sense of oneness. But in the process of these egoic pursuits, it is mostly destruction. That's not the only way. Doesn't seem like an effective way anyway. We don't have to destroy ourselves. We don't have to destroy others. We don't have to destroy this planet to realize oneness. We can just get still enough to realize it's already absolutely here. So that is part of the pointing to sensations, to curiosity, all of these things. Self-inquiry has a lot of value in this as well, as long as you realize that it's in essence. The inquiry itself is not made up of the words. It's not made up of the answer. What is the essence of all things? Can you perceive the very edges of experience? Can you perceive the very edges of your sense of time, the then and now, the moment you meditate to the moment where you feel like you re-identify? Explore that edge. Can you explore the edges of thoughts? Can you explore the edges of these sensations that seem to have a location? Can you explore the edges of what seems to be the body? It's bringing attention to all of these things. And if that feels like there's a sense of agency with that, then that's how truth is presenting itself. It must be engaged as such. No problem. This is about immersion. And what we find is in these moments of absolute immersion and engagement, we find ourselves losing ourselves, this flow state, so to speak. And there's so many varieties of this that people will report. It can happen in meditation. It can happen on a long run. It can happen while moving in nature. It can happen spontaneously on the bus. Doesn't matter really where it shows up. But that kind of immersion means that there's no one claiming dominion, ownership over experience. It's just experience speaking for itself. That is the essence of chop wood, carry water. In the midst of stacking wood, there is no one determining anything. It's just stacking wood. Simple, obvious, direct, spontaneous, immediate, sudden, these things. If you can find the immediacy in sensation And I don't mean that you have to look. I mean, you just rest with it and it reveals itself. I'm not intending to um, light a catalyst necessarily. I'm just saying pay enough attention where you can start to see the essence of sensation instead of the evaluation of sensation, and resting in some kind of answer, some kind of reflection. And you will start to see that sensation is absolutely indeterminable. It's just being guessed. And it's a long pattern of guessing for most human beings because we start to get a sense of orientation around sensation. A lot of that's conditioned. And we kind of stick to that. We assume it's true and we don't investigate any further. This is the place where a lot of magic is revealed. If every sensation is unknowable, and an unknowable or the unknown is where we find joy, this is where that pointing, and you've probably heard it here before, that every sensation you feel is the sensation of well being. You just don't know that because the evaluation system is giving you a sense of differentiation, a sense of distinction. Get curious about it. See if the sensation you don't like has some aspect of pleasure or peace or vastness to it. Be curious in such a way. If you feel like you reach a point of intensity, not encouraging you to push hard. Pushing too hard can lead to disassociation. What I am encouraging you to do is move to your threshold, what seems to be as much as you can possibly take, and see if you can go 1%, 2% beyond that. And thereby, you will be showing that there wasn't a threshold in the first place. If you go 101%, apparently what you thought was 100% wasn't true. And over time, as you allow this to mature and you allow this to unfold, there will just be an absolute immersion in experience itself. That's the pointing. So I have a session I'm about a minute late for at the moment. I appreciate everybody joining in today. I will give you one more Koan card before I roll out here. And this one says, does the body think? That's a good one, especially because this is about allowing attention to rest where there is no thought and being absolutely with that. Turn the flashlight of attention into, even if there seems to be thought there, see if they're actually connected. And we can get into that a little bit more. But thank you for joining me on this awesome Wednesday, and we'll talk to you soon. Nice to see you, Jennifer. All right. Bye.